Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
I appreciate and understand that the time it took and also the conclusion is not what most are wanting to hear.
More than 3 years after the massive and deadly fire that wiped out Lytton, the RCMP says its criminal investigation has not found a cause. Plus,
headlines that come in that say concern over chlorine production dangers, terrifying potential of chlorine leak.
what is behind a mysterious campaign targeting a chemical plant on the North Shore? A CBC News and Investigative Journalism Foundation probe finds it was a direct competitor. And goodbye squeegees and scaffolding. A Vancouver Island company is changing how we can clean high-rise buildings.
It was under a tenth of what a traditional scaffolding and pressure washing outfit would do.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Hello, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. It has been more than 3 years since a mammoth fire laid waste to the village of Lytton. 2 people died in that inferno that hit during the heat dome of 2021. Now the RCMP says it has finished its probe into what happened. Michelle Gassoub joins us now with more. Michelle, what are the main findings?
Well, Dan, Mounties say their criminal investigation has not determined a cause. The force says there is no evidence the blaze was intentionally set by the actions or the inactions of one or more people. So to summarize, Dan, no one is being found criminally responsible here. And RCMP did share some details of their investigation. They looked into the movements of individuals, vehicle traffic, and a freight train in that area before the fire broke out. They conducted an exhaustive search of the area, did 168 interviews, and reviewed photo and video evidence. They also took into account the weather conditions that day, which you may remember exceeded 48 degrees Celsius with powerful wind gusts, perfect conditions for a fire to ignite and spread quickly. And police say this investigation took so long because of how much evidence officers needed to review.
I appreciate and understand that the time it took and also the conclusion is not what most are wanting to hear. But this is the totality of the exhaustive work that was done by the investigative team in this case, and also outside agencies, subject matter experts, and all the evidence, as I discussed, that was collected to reach this conclusion.
And Michelle, to remind people, this was not the first probe into what happened in Lytton on that day.
Yeah, that's right. There have already been investigations by the BC Coroner Service because 2 people did die that day. There have also been investigations by the BC Wildfire Service and the Transportation Safety Board of Canada. And one of the main theories put forward in the aftermath was that the fire might have been started by a train that rolled by. Many locals believe that sparks flying from the railway could have ignited the train, which was, of course, extremely dry from the heat dome we had experienced in BC that week. The TSB did conclude that the fire started within 5 feet of the CN rail track, but ultimately that investigation found no evidence that the train was responsible for sparking that fire. So, Dan, this latest investigation from the RCMP is yet another report without a solid conclusion about what happened that day. RCMP are releasing their findings to the village of Lytton, the Lytton First Nation, and to the families of those that died. They say they would reopen this investigation if they received credible information in the future, Dan.
Michelle Gassoub reporting. Michelle, thanks very much. Leaders in North Vancouver are sounding the alarm over a mysterious campaign targeting local chemical plant Chemtrade. District councillors say they've received hundreds of emails from accounts claiming to be North Vancouver residents who were concerned about a potential chlorine spill. But an investigation by CBC News and the Investigative Journalism Foundation traced the campaign to a Toronto-based lobby firm. And as John Hernandez reports, the effort was funded by one of Chemtrade's direct competitors.
In the last few weeks now, I get about 10 to 20 emails a day.
Catherine Pope's inbox has been flooded for months. A series of emails with what the North Vancouver councillor calls alarming headlines.
Headlines that come in that say concern over chlorine production dangers, preventing a catastrophic chlorine leak, terrifying potential of chlorine leak.
The messengers claim to be residents or former residents of North Vancouver who are concerned about Chemtrade Logistics, a local chemical plant that makes chlorine. It's all part of a seemingly grassroots campaign dubbed Keep North Vancouver Safe. A website and social media posts warn residents about the risks of a potential chlorine disaster like a spill, and urges them to contact elected officials to try to put a stop to local chlorine production. Pope has long questioned where these emails were coming from.
To be honest, you wouldn't normally see that from, say, your average member of the public.
Other councillors, the mayor, and local MLAs have also received emails, but couldn't find out who organized the campaign.
It's a lobby group that doesn't have any information on the Keep North Vancouver Safe website. You'd think they would have something about who they are.
A CBC News and Investigative Journalism Foundation investigation was able to trace the website's coding to Crestview Strategy, a lobby firm based in Toronto. When contacted, the firm confirmed it launched the campaign on behalf of Toronto-based company K2 Pure Solutions, a company whose goal is eliminating the need for transportation of chlorine by producing exceptionally pure bleach. In quarterly reports, Chemtrade lists K2 as a key competitor. The Meta ad library estimates Keep North Vancouver Safe spent $18,000 on social media posts over the last few months. In a statement, a spokesperson for K2 said the company decided to launch the campaign after discovering Chemtrade was looking to renew its lease to produce chlorine, saying, quote, Chemtrade had been quietly lobbying municipal, provincial, and federal governments to reverse a decision made in 2007 to end the production and transport of chlorine in North Vancouver by 2030, putting the local community at an increased risk of a hazardous spill or transportation accident. Chemtrade staff say they aren't surprised they were targeted by a competitor.
You can kind of assume what the benefits would be for a competitor if we had to close down our facility.
Executive Alan Robinson says the company stands by its safety record and will continue talks with government to renew its lease.
So we've been running that plant safely for 65 years. We have an improvement in how we'll even continue to make safety improvements.
This type of kind of political influence campaign by a firm or an industry association is now very, very common.
This researcher calls the effort a textbook AstroTurf campaign, where an interest group quietly tries to start a grassroots movement.
So what makes it AstroTurf is the idea is really the lack of transparency. An AstroTurf campaign is inherently corrosive, I would say, to political discourse or democracy, because it gives people a false sense of what the people around them believe.
An effort that's left a sour taste in the mouths of local leaders.
Just tell us who you are. Let's have a conversation and let's all, be honest.
Chemtrade says it hopes to renew its lease to make chlorine. K2 says it stands by the campaign, which is still online. John Hernandez, CBC News, North Vancouver.
And an update for you. Since this story went live earlier in the day, K2P Solutions has released a statement apologizing for how the Keep North Vancouver Safe campaign was handled. The company says, quote, "We sincerely apologize if our lack of transparency has caused mistrust, and we hope that this mistake does not detract from the facts of the matter." The BC Conservative Party says it will use involuntary treatment to care for British Columbians suffering from severe addictions if it wins the fall provincial election. Leader John Rustad says he is committed to involuntary treatment for people, especially children, suffering from severe addictions, adding, "The current system has failed not only youth, but also adults who are struggling without adequate support." The announcement comes less than a week after an attack in Vancouver left one man dead and another severely injured. Police say the assaults were random and unprovoked. One day after a mistrial was declared in the double murder trial of Kane Carter, the Crown says it is seeking a retrial. This case centers around a 2018 shooting which left one man and a teenage bystander dead in Vancouver. Karen Larson has more from the courts.
Kane Carter was facing 2 counts of first-degree murder dating back to January of 2018. One of the dead, 15-year-old Alfred Wong of Coquitlam, was killed by a stray bullet while in the back seat of his parents' car as the family drove down East Broadway. Alleged rival gang member Kevin Whiteside was also shot and killed in that shootout. At trial, Crown prosecutors argued Carter shot and killed Whiteside intentionally and inadvertently killed Wong, an innocent victim of the gang war. But Carter's defense asserted the evidence against the accused was entirely circumstantial and did not prove it was Carter who fired the fatal shots. The jury deliberated for 5 days, but in the end could not reach a unanimous verdict, and a mistrial was declared. The retrial isn't likely to begin until next year. Karen Larson, CBC News, Vancouver.
Police in northern BC say they have identified a suspect in a deadly hit and run on Sunday and seized a vehicle. It happened in the area of Old LaKelse Lake Drive and Clark Street, east of Terrace, near Thornhill. The family of the victim have identified him as 57-year-old Brian Adams. He was a member of the Nisga'a and Kitsellas First Nations and lived in the Kitsellas community of Githouse. They say he was walking home from his nephew's stag party when he was hit. Police say he died at the scene. Officers now say the suspect vehicle was owned by a local taxi company. They have identified the driver, but say the suspect has since fled the country. The parents of a 14-year-old girl from Victoria are raising concerns after she was taken off a Porter Airlines flight in Toronto. It was Cameron Larkin's first time traveling alone. Porter said she was among those removed due to weight and balance issues on the plane. Her parents argue it ought to have been someone else instead of an unaccompanied minor. More now from Ali Chiasson.
14-year-old Cameron Larkin was flying solo from Toronto to Victoria after a visit with family and friends.
So I was sitting down, I was ready for the plane to take off.
But before her Porter Airlines flight departed, a flight attendant pulled her aside and told her
there had been a problem, so I need to get off the aircraft.
It was her first time traveling alone.
This is your experience.
Flight attendant said that she would talk to me outside the plane. And so the flight attendants behind me, they closed the door. So I was really confused because I was like, I'm supposed to be on that plane.
So what happened? Well, it's a rare case where, for safety reasons,
they may have to reduce the payload of the aircraft, which means weight and balance. So they take off either travelers or cargo.
Airlines then ask for volunteers to exit in exchange for a rebooking and a discount. But nobody agreed, so Cameron was one of several who were removed. But she says she was the only unaccompanied minor.
I was completely shocked, confused, very worried about her.
Fortunately, Cameron's dad was in Toronto and could pick her up. But her mom, Kathy, wonders if it happened to another child who didn't have that option.
They might be traveling, far from family and friends.
In a statement to CBC News, a spokesperson for Porter explained Porter's unaccompanied minor policy applies to passengers between the ages of 8 and 11 traveling alone. For passengers 12 to 17, there's an option to purchase the unaccompanied minor service. The extra supervision costs $100. If it's not purchased, there's no guarantee the passenger will keep their seat.
An airline would basically treat them like any other customer. It should not be assumed that an airline will take special care of someone who hasn't flagged themselves for that kind of special attention.
While the Larkins didn't buy it, they say because they didn't know about the policy, Cameron's mom says,
and she's a minor traveling unaccompanied, go to the next person. It doesn't take a genius.
Meanwhile, those in the industry say rules weren't broken. It's just policy, and parents got to pay up. Ali Chiasson, CBC News, Toronto.
Nanaimo City Council has once again said yes to a project to house dozens of people without homes, but it was very close. As Claire Palmer reports, supporters say it's meant to destigmatize people who will use the service.
This plot of land is the site of a multi-year project finally coming to Nanaimo. It's meant to house dozens of people without homes and provide wraparound services.
60 individuals are going to be housed, are going to be cared for, and have an opportunity to better themselves and make the community safer.
This site is on the south end of the city. One of the conditions of the lease was a good neighbor agreement and community advisory committee. But last month, BC Housing told council it no longer does those agreements. Instead, it's moving to what it calls community integration plans that can be customized to local needs.
Well, it's vitally important that we have a process that engages community, engages local government, but at the same time doesn't further stigmatize people that are living in the housing. Because with that stigmatization, people will not stay. They'll go outside, they'll go into parks, they'll go into encampments, and that's the opposite of what we're trying to do.
Council was divided and the revisions narrowly passed 5-4.
I don't see this as more robust. I don't see it as more responsive. I see a bunch of assurances that I just cannot take at face value.
We had a choice. We either leave 60 people in our streets, or we help the province address it as it is the province's responsibility.
The Vancouver Island Mental Health Association will run the centre, which is set to open next year. Claire Palmer, CBC News, Nanaimo.
Forestry giant Canfor has sold its license to log BC's fourth largest timber supply area to 2 First Nations. The McLeod Lake Indian Band and the Sept Dene Nation now have equal shares in the roughly 64,000 square kilometre Mackenzie timber supply area in northern BC. You can see it there. The sale will give each nation license to harvest more than 430,000 cubic meters of timber every year. The transfer comes as Canfor announced it would close its mills in Vanderhoof and Fort St. John by the end of the year, putting an estimated 500 people out of work. Kwantlen Polytechnic University is launching a new degree program next fall in traditional Chinese medicine. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson explains what it will take to graduate and why some say the lessons are not supported by science.
For this condition,
next fall, Kwantlen Polytechnic University will become the first in Canada to offer a bachelor's degree in traditional Chinese medicine, which includes acupuncture, herbology, and other branches.
Go this order.
Chair of Program John Yang says the way the curriculum is designed will reassure prospective patients that so-called TCM is a viable branch of medicine.
By design, the curriculum make sure the student we have a practice safety, and we have a practice management courses, and we have a communication and ethics course, and then the public will be more confident to trust.
Proponents of so-called integrative medicine see this new bachelor's program as a positive move.
Acupuncture, chiropractic, massage therapy, vitamins, yoga, by and large, these things are not well integrated into our public healthcare system.
But many in the Canadian medical and scientific establishment remain wary.
My fear is that it will give traditional Chinese medicine even more credibility that it has not earned scientifically. We all want treatments that are based on sound science and good evidence. Traditional Chinese medicine does not, in my opinion, qualify as such.
But with overstretched healthcare system and aging population,
is insomnia.
Students like Caldwell Lever say the time is now to not replace but work along with Canadian medical system.
I think it's an exciting opportunity to reach across the aisle, to meet with other healthcare practitioners, to show up and say, yes, we're ready for that conversation.
As a study that originated thousands of years ago on a different continent makes itself at home at a BC campus. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson, CBC News, Toronto.
Say goodbye to squeegees and scaffolding. A Victoria company is changing the way high-rise buildings are getting cleaned. Instead of ladders, Sky Dweller Technologies uses drones for exterior window washing in the Greater Victoria area. The company says it promises improved safety and big savings. Take a look.
We incorporate drones to exterior washing and cleaning of facades and windows, as well as thermal scans, LiDAR, and 3D mapping for various different building types and applications.
It came across in my inbox. It was under a tenth of what a traditional scaffolding and pressure washing outfit would do. You can imagine the 2 towers fully clad in scaffold and man lift, the amount of money and time that would take compared to what these guys have done has been outstanding.
This just seems like a lot safer in my mind. I love the idea of doing something a little bit different, a little bit more innovative. You know, having not having humans in an unsafe location, and then also the ability to have this done outside of standard work hours. You know, instead of having an army of folks here all cleaning the windows, we can have a really small crew of folks here in the secure side of the airport doing the cleaning for us.
So what did this building look like when you first arrived?
Very, very dirty, moldy, very black.
Darius Madavi joins us now with a first look at the weather. We're getting some rain.
Yes, rain, especially in the interior right now. The rain that was affecting the south coast yesterday, moving throughout the interior. But don't worry, Dan, there's more rain on the way, especially as we get into the weekend. 1 day of showers and 1 day of dry, sunnier weather. So, you know, something for everybody. Now, in the meantime, let's talk about the fire danger. It is continuing to decline as we move out of that hotter stretch we had last week into some more autumnal weather, cooler, wetter, a little bit at least. Now, over the next few days, we're going to take a closer look at this later this hour, but for now, just to show just the general trends of what's happening. Some more showers breaking into the coast and into the interior at times. Most of it concentrated up in the northwest, but at times also making its way down to the south, particularly on Saturday, and then potentially returning. You can see that wave of precipitation up in the northwest, potentially coming back down midweek next week to the rest of the province. So still a decent amount of rain on the way. Smoke and haze, meanwhile, again, heading into the end of smoke season, it seems like, mostly confined down in the southeast for the most part. That is mostly haze. A little bit of surface smoke may make its way down to other parts of the province as well, but generally speaking, most of it is behind us, and that'll continue to be the case. Even as we do get some sunnier weather, it'll still be unsettled enough to mostly disperse that smoke. We're not going to see any major pockets of smoke anytime soon, which is, again, a little bit of good news. If you look at our forecast for tonight, again, a few showers possible in parts of the interior, but generally speaking, fairly calm. And it'll be the same story tomorrow, Dan. We got some more cloud building in for the morning, but then should clear up again in the afternoon.
Sounds good. We'll chat later. Thanks, Darius.
Thank you.
Temporary modular housing plays an important role in addressing homelessness in Vancouver and beyond. But what happens when it's torn down to make room for development? The CBC's Caroline Chan learned more about the advantages and challenges of making temporary modular housing permanent.
I'm here in a parking lot in Vancouver, just on the corner of Dunsmuir and Cambie, and we're just north of the new site of the Vancouver Art Gallery. And I'm here with Jean Swanson, who is with the Carnegie Housing Project. Hi, Jean.
Hi.
So, Jean, not too long ago, what was on this site?
98 units of really nice modular housing with kitchens and bathrooms that people loved.
What does it make you feel when you see that it's a parking lot now?
I feel like tearing my hair out because we have about 3,000 people on the wait list for supportive housing in Vancouver. This was 98 units of supportive housing and it's gone. We could be losing 700 modular units and we've only got about 583 that are projected to come in the next 5 years.
I've heard from BC Housing that the units that were here were disassembled and moved to outside Kamloops. What does that tell you about the need that's here in Vancouver?
It tells me that somebody isn't prioritizing the need in Vancouver. We got 3,000 people on the supportive housing wait list here. It looks to me like over the next 5 years, we're actually going to be losing supportive housing units because no one is prioritizing that in Vancouver.
What would you like to see be done to help this situation?
Number one, the city should find sites or extend leases of all the modular supportive housing in Vancouver. That's an absolute basic bottom line. And then number two, the province and the feds, because the feds haven't been funding much at all, they should fund a lot more supportive housing and housing that people on welfare, disability, and pension can afford, which is about $500 a month.
So, Jean, we're here on the corner of Powell and Jackson. Can you tell us about the building here?
This is another supportive housing building. I think it's got 39 units. People have all been told that they have to leave, I think, by this spring. It's going to be replaced with social housing, which is good, but only a portion of that social housing will be for low-income people. So what we need is not only to have that new social housing, but for this modular housing to be put on another site in Vancouver, so some people on the some of the 3,000 people on the supportive housing list can get into it.
How do we need to rethink temporary modular housing?
So I think the word temporary really screws up the way people think about it. The temporary part is the land. The buildings can last 30 or 40 years. And so all that needs to happen is that the buildings have to be moved. So we can't think of them as temporary. We have to try and get all the housing we can for low-income people, and I think we need to use this housing.
What makes modular housing so special?
So the good thing about the modular housing is it's nice. People love it. They think they've won the lottery when they get in it. It's way bigger than a SRO. It's got a private bathroom, which an SRO doesn't have. It's got kitchen stuff, a stove and a fridge. Yeah, so it's way nicer than the SROs.
You've been an advocate for a very long time. How big was homelessness as an issue, like 3 decades ago, 4 decades ago?
I used to work at the Downtown East Side Residents Association in the 70s, and we worked for similar kind of things like higher welfare rates, cleaning up the SROs. You know what we didn't work for? Ending homelessness. Do you know why? Because there was hardly any.
How does it make you feel now that homelessness is one of the biggest issues out here?
Well, it's very frustrating because it would be so easy to end homelessness. All we need to do is get housing that low-income people can afford. And governments used to do that in the old days. They built lots of social housing that poor people could afford, and nowadays they're not doing it. The federal government especially is really bad nowadays, whereas in the old days they did build social housing.
With the Carnegie Housing Project, you've looked at 3 different things to end homelessness. What would those things be?
So we've actually boiled it. We had 42 recommendations, but we boiled it down to stop the loss. So one way of stopping the loss is to find sites for the modular housing. Another way would be to get SRO vacancy control, which we got thanks to the government. We got that, the city and the province. The second thing is build affordable housing that low-income people can afford. Low-income people can't afford most social housing. And the third thing is treat people who are homeless humanely until we get that, which means we need more shelter space and tiny home villages.
Do you have hope that that can be achieved?
It could easily be achieved if there was a political will.
Coming up, a group of researchers have released a special kind of starfish into the wild. More about their project and what it might mean for underwater ecosystems after this. Sunflower stars, a type of starfish, are being released into the wild around the San Juan Islands in Washington state. They're the first of their kind to have been bred in captivity by researchers at the University of Washington. A mysterious disease killed off billions of them over the past decade, upending underwater systems from Alaska to California. Joining us now is University of Washington research scientist Jason Hoden, who's leading this project. Jason, thanks for being here. How long have you been raising your sunflower stars?
So it's been almost exactly 5 years now when we started the project. And yeah, it's coming up on the 5th anniversary of the first fertilization event of now our oldest stars in the wild.
What makes sunflower stars so special and unique?
Well, there's a lot of things about them that make them unique. Your viewers might have recognized them. They're extremely colorful. They've got numerous arms, so they're over 20 arms in some cases, and they move actually a lot faster than your typical star. They're top predators, so they're quite active.
So you've released them into the wild. How are you going to monitor their progress?
So there's no way that we have of tagging them per se. So what we've been doing is taking photographs of them before we release them, and then we find stars in the wild using their sort of unique body patterns to see if we're looking at the exact same star.
And how important are sun stars to the ecosystem, especially, I understand, when it comes to things like kelp forests?
Yeah, so I mean, they're top predators, and you know, you've probably heard about other cases like wolves, that when top predators are gone from ecosystems, it can have really tremendous cascading effects on the ecosystems overall. And we saw that dramatically in California. So, you know, you talked about this disappearance of sunflower stars. It was really bad in California, and we lost almost all of them. And then almost immediately afterwards, the kelp forests started to disappear, which are like this incredible foundational important habitat, the most important marine habitat on our coast. And with the disappearance of the kelp, what we saw was that was caused by this explosion of urchins that occurred around the same time. And so sunflower stars eat urchins, and I think you can kind of piece together what the the connections are here of why we think that that ecosystem collapse occurred, at least in part, and one of the reasons why sunflower stars are so important.
And any idea what killed them off? Was it climate change, warmer oceans? Like, where do you look?
Yeah, so I mean, so I think you mentioned that there was a disease, and we really think that the pretty much the only reason that they died off was because they were very susceptible to a specific outbreak of a known disease, but one that was a really bad outbreak 10 years ago now, and it just wiped out sunflower stars more than any of the other star species that were affected by it. And so we don't think sunflower stars are particularly vulnerable. Our experiments suggest that they're really good in warm temperatures. They can survive in low salinity pulses, like when fresh water comes in. So we think that they're pretty robust. They just happen to be very susceptible to this disease, and it had devastating effects on them.
And what will success look like to you with this experiment?
Well, I mean, we're going to keep monitoring these stars. I mean, to us, it's been successful already. You know, we've been thinking about this for 5 years now, and we successfully reintroduced stars into the wild that we bred entirely in captivity for years until the point that they got released. So that's a success in its own. But the more we follow this, and the more that we're able to track these stars over time, looking at whether they can grow, how long they will stick around in the same spot. These are all really important questions for what we would ultimately like to do, we writ large, which is release lots of these stars potentially into the wild to help repopulate areas where they're gone.
Jason Hoden from UW, we really appreciate your time and expertise. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, it was a pleasure.
Deemed Canada's art heist of the century. For 2 years, the case of a missing portrait of Winston Churchill baffled authorities until now. We'll tell you where they found the roaring lion after this. More than 2 years after it went missing, an iconic photo of Sir Winston Churchill has been found, bringing an end to one of Canada's most intriguing crimes. The famous portrait of Winston Churchill disappeared from the Chateau Laurier Hotel in Ottawa. The CBC's Nicole Williams explains.
I'm thrilled, and Mrs. Karsh is thrilled.
It's known as the Roaring Lion, one of the most famous portraits in the world, taken of Sir Winston Churchill in 1941 by famed Canadian photographer Yusuf Karsh, following the British Prime Minister's speech to Canadian Parliament. For the last 2 years, it's been missing. And today, police say it's been found.
We've been waiting for this day for over 2 years now, and I'm beyond excited.
I'm pleased today to advise the public and the media that we are in the process of recovering the Roaring Lion from Italy.
The portrait had hung on the walls of the Chateau Laurier in Ottawa for nearly 25 years, until one day it was discovered the portrait on the walls was a fake. Unnoticed for months, finally spotted by a member of his estate, the giveaway, Karsh's signature in the corner of the portrait. The brazen heist made international headlines and set Ottawa police on a global hunt for the photo. A key clue, the most recent picture of the real portrait was taken on Christmas Day in 2021, and the fake in its place by January 6th, 2022.
I just couldn't believe that someone could actually do that.
Now, 2 years later, investigators confirmed they were able to track down the photo in Italy. The portrait was purchased from renowned London auction house Sotheby's. Police say neither the buyer or seller were aware that the piece was in fact stolen. And while the details of the investigation are being kept quiet for now, police arrested a 43-year-old man from Powassan, Ontario back in April. He's been charged with theft, forgery, and trafficking stolen property. Canadian officials will be heading to Rome later this month, where the portrait will be returned during a special ceremony and eventually brought back to the hotel to hang in its rightful place. Nicole Williams, CBC News, Ottawa.
Federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has directly challenged the federal NDP to help him take down the Liberals. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he is ready for a fight, but as the parties prepare for the resumption of Parliament and a minority government that's vulnerable, it's clear an election could come at any time. More now from Ashley Burke.
For the third week in a row, Pierre Poilievre's trying to throw down the gauntlet.
It's put up or shut up time.
And force an election he seems confident he'll win.
The common sense Conservatives will put forward a non-confidence motion at the earliest possible opportunity. And I'm asking Jagmeet Singh and the NDP to commit unequivocally before Monday's by-elections.
Now he's making it a double dog dare.
Est-ce que le Bloc va voter pour les Québécois?
Challenging the Bloc Québécois to take down the government by voting for it too.
On n'est pas payé à l'heure pour que...
The Bloc's leader has already said he's not working for Poilievre and will do what's best for Quebec. Jagmeet Singh won't say how he'd vote either.
I'm not going to say our decision ahead of time.
But Singh did say what he thinks of Poilievre, who repeatedly mispronounces his name and won't stop calling him Sellout Singh.
He likes to insult people and call people names. I think that shows you what type of person he is.
Right now, Poilievre's call to action is going nowhere, at a time when the NDP and Liberals are both meeting with their caucuses to strategize their next moves.
We believe in Canadians.
After a summer of reflection and some Canadians and some of his own MPs calling for change, Justin Trudeau has given no signs of a new plan, but is preparing for a fierce fight.
I can't wait to continue getting into it this fall with Poilievre, whose perspective is cuts are the only way forward.
All of this unfolding on a day that felt like an election campaign. The party's leaders out in front of cameras before two high-stake by-elections on Monday. That's the same day MPs are heading back to Parliament Hill, and we'll see how soon Poilievre can take his challenge to the floor of the House of Commons, and if anyone actually follows through on his dare. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
The race for the White House has kicked into high gear after last night's presidential debate. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump clashed on abortion, the economy, and immigration, among other topics. Democrats and even some Republicans believe Harris emerged the winner. Trump, however, says he won the night. Chris Reyes looks at what voters think.
Kamala Harris. Let's have a good debate.
See you. Have fun.
Thank you.
It didn't take long for both candidates to claim victory after the 90-minute debate.
This was my best debate. I thought it was very good. I thought she was very weak on foreign policy. She was very weak on the border, and I'm very happy.
I think that we think today was a good day, and it kind of was. But we have 56 days to go, and guys, we're still the underdogs in this race. It's tight.
The debate touched on a wide range of issues: the economy, immigration, foreign policy, and reproductive rights. But it was short on policy details and heavy on the personal hits.
She's a Marxist. Everybody knows she's a Marxist.
It is well known that he admires dictators, wants to be a dictator on day one, according to himself. So many military leaders who you have worked with have told me you are a disgrace.
One notable endorsement came right after the debate, an Instagram post from the pop star Taylor Swift.
We're honored to have the endorsement of Taylor Swift because I think that Taylor Swift saw what millions of Americans saw last night on the stage. She saw Donald Trump refuse to say if he would sign a national abortion ban. She saw him continue to demean America, and that's not the kind of America that Taylor Swift wants to be in.
From Republicans, the overwhelming criticism that the moderators went easy on Kamala Harris and that Harris wasn't held accountable for President Joe Biden's record.
She spent her time trying to goad Donald Trump, trying to taunt Donald Trump. But what Kamala Harris didn't do is talk about policy to impact the lives of the American people.
While it's voters who will decide who won the debate, some analysts say Trump's angry outbursts gave Harris the upper hand.
I think Kamala Harris won the debate. She was able to trip Donald Trump up, keep him on the defensive, basically from the start when she essentially forced him to shake her hand. She set the rhythm and the tempo of the debate, and she knocked Trump off his game from the start.
No word yet on whether there will be a second debate between the two, though other networks, including Fox News, have made it clear they want to host one. One debate that's confirmed is happening this October between the VP candidates, J.D. Vance and Tim Walz. Chris Reyes, CBC News, New York.
People in Louisiana are stocking up on gas, food, and water as Hurricane Francine barrels toward the U.S. Gulf states. What's next and what officials are warning after this? Hurricane Francine has now strengthened into a Category 2 storm, expected to make landfall along the Louisiana coast south of Baton Rouge. People there have been stocking up on gas, water, and other supplies as that storm barrels toward the U.S. Gulf states. And winds will increase as the storm approaches shore. Officials in New Orleans are warning the powerful storm could spawn tornadoes, as well as heavy rain, flooding, damaging winds, and a dangerous storm surge. Let's bring in Darius Madavi now. And before we get to our weather, what's happening with Francine? It looks like it's close by.
Yes, it has now made landfall in Louisiana, and as it continues to track north, we're seeing some very, very heavy rainfall in some of these areas, lots of embedded thunderstorms, and we're expecting to see quite a number of impacts. Now, if we take a look at all the warnings that we have in place across the region, this is really just looks like a mess. Let's go one by one. Hurricane warnings in place in many areas, as well as watches, tropical storms warnings and watches. We have storm surge warnings, high surf warnings. In some places, storm surge expected to be up to 3 to 4 meters above sea level. Flooding watches and warnings in many places, as well as some tornado watches in place. And we've seen warnings come in and out as a result of those thunderstorms being pulled along by the hurricane. Now, one thing I want to note, this was a Category 1 storm, unexpectedly strengthened just barely into a Category 2, but what's important is not the fact that it just barely made it up to a Category 2, because that's sort of a fairly unimportant distinction, it's really just a 5 kilometer plus addition to the wind speed. But with that being said, what is important is that means it gained 50 kilometers per hour in terms of that wind speed in just a 24-hour period. And that means this is the third Atlantic hurricane this year to undergo rapid intensification. And that is one of the strongest links between climate change and hurricanes in the Atlantic. So definitely worth noting. Now, let's turn to our weather here in BC. We have some rain spreading across the region. For the most part, fairly calm. A lot of it feeding into the northwest, and then a little bit as we get into the weekend coming down into the south as well. But generally, that's the story. That's really all we have. Temperatures staying a little bit below seasonal, but overall, nothing to write home about. Tomorrow, we have a little bit more sunshine than we have today as a little weak ridge takes over on parts of the province, but generally, still quite a bit of cloud and still quite a bit below seasonal. And Dan, over the next few days, expect once again to see cloud coming in and out and things feeling a little bit autumnal.
Okay. That's the second time you've used that word. Nicely done. Finding the perfect pine cone on the forest floor. We look at why pickers are filling their buckets. You'll want to see and hear this. It is an unusual job, scouring the forest floors for pine cones, but fun fact, not every cone is created equal.
Shelley Joyce from CBC Kamloops met up with some pickers to reveal what makes for a perfect pine cone.
This is what we call our cone shack. So we have the cones drying on these racks so that they can expand before we ship them to the tree seed center in Surrey, where they actually process them and get the seed out. We pick the cones into 20-liter buckets. This is a full bucket of cones. And as they dry, they open up and the seeds start being able to fall out. Anything we pick, we first check how the seeds are. So this is an example of a cone. So we're cutting the filled seeds. And this one's actually pretty good because for Ponderosa you want at least 7 filled seeds, which this one has 8. So this is a good cone. And if we find a tree with good cones like that, then that's what we pick. It's really nice that all of these seeds are going to be turned into seedlings at nurseries. So each tree that we pick from is going to have thousands of offspring, hand planted by a tree planter in BC, which is quite nice in the sustainable forestry industry. We get to work beautiful places, and yeah, we're just basically like squirrels.
I really love being outside and yeah, working with the trees. Just my first year actually. I'm dreaming about cones, yeah, often.
This is a bad cone, you can see the discoloration. As you can see, this one only has 1, maybe 2 good seed, and the other seed have all been eaten or killed due to there being a pest in here. Sometimes you'll actually see the little larvae. This cone is uniform in color. This one has this little brown discoloration at the bottom. So that shows that these scales are actually dead and that there's a little larva in there eating away. It's just really fun to see the trees go back in the ground. And every tree that we pick, we're picking the cones, that tree is going to have thousands of progeny, which is also kind of nice to think about.
Now we know.
Yeah. I can't explain why, but when he said this is a bad cone, I felt bad for the pine cone.
Yeah.
And
don't eat it though, okay?
Okay. Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. You can watch this newscast on CBC Gem, our free app, as well as on YouTube and our website, cbc.ca/BC.
And Janella Hamilton will have your next local news at 11 o'clock, right after the National. So please join her then. Good night.